actually have Penley, we hope, provided he wakes up in time. You know, he's an artist. With us a little later on in the program to present and create some sort of presidential portrait.
Right. We wanted Picasso. He didn't pick up, so we want Penley.
Not going to pick up.
Yeah, wasn't going to pick up. I would say this, George Washington, his birthday is the 22nd, so this is close to his birthday.
A lot of people out of school today, and many of you are out of work today or off work today. Banks are closed.
Yep, even the ATMs are closed.
That's right.
No, they're not. You can still get your money.
Also, Ainsley went down to Texas with the vice president. You're going to see some of her exclusive, and it will make news interview in a couple of minutes.
That's right.
Meanwhile, the #1 story in the country remains, and justifiably so, what happened at Parkland, at the school, which they're still debating whether they should open again. In fact, the sheriff there said, we should just wreck it and put the kids in trailers until we build a new school.
That building.
Yeah, to that building. So let's get rid of it. But people are, for the first time, I think that of all these shootings, the new element to this is
the lights got darker.
Yeah, the lights change.
I like that. That feels good.
It feels a little different. Is the kids are speaking out. The kids are saying, I want action on this. This is not okay. And the amount of signals missed from the killer are staggering.
Kids are saying there's going to be a march on Washington, and that's going to be on March 24th. They're demanding action on the gun control debate, using protests and political action, saying, please stop allowing us to get gunned down in our hallways.
They're starting a new viral campaign. It's hashtag Never Again. Never again will a gunman terrorize a school building. Never again will a mass murderer leave a community grieving. The President of the United States apparently over the weekend reached out to somebody who was involved in some bipartisan background check changes. The press secretary, Sarah Sanders, issued this statement. The president spoke to Senator Cornyn of Texas on Friday about the bipartisan bill he and Senator Chris Murphy introduced to improve federal compliance with criminal background check legislation. While discussions are ongoing and revisions are being considered, the president is supportive of efforts to improve the federal background check system. The president also, on Wednesday of this week, is going to meet with young people. He's going to have a listening session with them to figure out, what they would like to see happen going forward.
As is Marco Rubio, and I think that's great. Rather than sit there and say, okay, let's go to back and forth, let's deal with the kids. And a lot of them are lashing out at him, which is, I can understand the emotion, but he's been in the job 13 months. Guns have been an issue in this country, back and forth, controversial, not support or not support, really since day one. But I also think it's going to be interesting to see if we're ever going to have a different inclusion on the background check. Almost everybody I know says, yeah, you got to have a background check. But should police reports be on a background check? If someone comes to an 18-year-old's house 30-something times, should that be there?
Absolutely.
Should you if you're 18 and you, for some reason, get an AR-15, should you have a listing there on how many issues you had at the age of 18 in schools from the time you were in primary school?
Well, what if somebody actually called the FBI and said, hey, I know this kid who's about to turn 18, and he said he wanted to kill people, and he's got a disturbing social media profile, and he's got a gun. What should happen in a situation like that? And now we know the FBI, somebody called with that tip to the FBI hotline, and it never got sent down to the Miami office. I know Senator Jeff Sessions has said that he wants a review of Department of Justice protocols to figure out exactly what went wrong.
I don't think most Americans would be against that. I mean, if your child is in school with someone who the police has been called, even the parents, even the people raising that child have called the police on this kid so many times, and this kid has an AR-15, I think that's fine to put that on the background check. I would want to know if my daughter's in school with someone that police have gone to their house, how many times, dozens of times, or how many calls to police about this kid. I think it's totally fine to put that on their background check. And then if that's the case, and they've been expelled, and they have erratic behavior, and they have abused animals, I think it's completely fine to put that on the background check and prevent that person from getting a gun.
And I think it's also interesting to see what else came out when talking about the school and what the school knew. One of these guys that dated his girl, Cruz's ex-girlfriend, and then they had since broken up. He had 4 separate fights with this guy. And then he got direct messages on Twitter saying, you don't know what I'm capable of, and I have a gun, and I'm going to shoot you. So he told school security, and he was unable to say if school security did anything at all.
Well, there was a story floating around last week in the Sun Sentinel down in Florida Fort Lauderdale that suggested that maybe the back and forth between the shooter and the ex-boyfriend could have had something to do with the fact that he was expelled. Ultimately, what it comes down to is unstable people should not have access to guns. Going forward, the big question is something needs to happen from both sides to prevent bad people from doing bad things to good people. And that's why this movement seems to have picked up steam, why the president is going to be meeting with people. And who knows, maybe there will be this Chris Murphy and John Cornyn bill, maybe something will be done to the federal background checks, because the way it's working right now ain't working.
Well, Brian kept mentioning last week that these police officers in the schools need to have guns so that they can protect themselves.
They had guns, and
protect the kids.
But
they did.
Yes. But one guard had a gun, not the security guard who was the coach. Number one. Number two is, if you have a school that large, you have to have a system where they know what entrances to funnel in and out of. And I think the one thing that could emerge from this that I think most people would embrace is, I don't want to set up a TSA for schools, but I would like some standardized security for schools, allow and not allow, so we could have a Department of Education and Security at the same time.
Unfortunately, this school had it all. There was one point where everybody went through, they had an ID, but the shooter figured out at closing time they're going to be opening the gates, and I can go in at that time. That's why he diabolically wore his ROTC, junior ROTC shirt, so he would blend in.
All right. Also, at the end of the week, we talked about more than a dozen people were indicted. 13 Russians were indicted last week for trying to meddle in our campaign in 2016, in the presidential campaign. Some of the Democrats were on the Sunday shows this weekend, and they were saying even President Obama should have done more to prevent this. Listen.
Look, Obama was in a very difficult position. He did not want to make it appear that he was favoring Hillary Clinton. Maybe he should have done more.
I've said all along that I thought the Obama administration should have done more. None of that is an excuse for this president to sit on his hands. It is inexplicable that the President of the United States continues to sit on sanctions that Congress passed, that Congress wants to enforce against Russia over this interference.
What is seen in this particular indictment is their strategic goal was to sow discord. The indictment also says that it did not change the outcome of the election. But keep in mind, it also says this started in 2014. This was long before Donald Trump got into it. Rush Limbaugh was on with Chris over the weekend on Fox News Sunday and said, look, the whole thing's become very political.
I think this is all politics, and it's, Chris, it hasn't changed from the get-go. It is about protecting Hillary and Obama. Obama is the primary person being protected here because all of this spying and all of this collusion to destroy Trump happened with his knowledge and probably encouragement. And the reason Hillary isn't charged is because that would mean Obama would have to be exposed as participating in the scheme, too.
And this thing is not done. I mean, it's funded for the next 2 years to 2019 in this budget. This is a pretty thorough 36 pages. It's worth reading to go through to see the intricacies in which the Russians perpetrated our election. And I really feel the fearlessness in which they did it. They didn't feel like there was going to be any retribution at all. Well, if we did that, we knew there would be blowback. And yet they feel they can do it, and they're doing it again. That was 2 days before. They're already working on the 2018 election. But I don't think social media flipped this election any direction. The 90% of the electorate is not going, I wonder who I should vote for. Let's look on Twitter or Facebook or YouTube.
Well, it started in 2014 that we know of, and it continued, and the Obama administration knew it was happening, but did nothing.
All right. Well, we were down at the border on Friday with the vice president. There was a lot of people from the media down there following him because he was talking about border security. We're going to talk about that coming up. But we asked him the question about Joy Behar because that was an issue you all really cared about and wrote us at the end of the week last week. Joy Behar said because he prays to God and because God speaks to him, like he does many of you, that Joy Behar said he had a mental illness because God speaks to him and he hears from God. So we asked him what he thought about that. Listen.
Joy Behar made a comment saying that leads her to believe that you have mental problems because God speaks to you. Is it hypocrisy that liberals, Democrats, mainstream media, they preach tolerance, but yet when someone wants to be a Christian and says that God speaks to them, they have a problem with that?
Those of us in public life are pretty accustomed to criticism. But when I heard that ABC had a program that likened my Christianity to mental illness, I just couldn't be silent. My Christian faith is probably the most important thing in my life. I do try and start every day reading the Bible. My wife and I try and have a prayer together before I leave the house every morning. But I do think I'm a very typical American. I think people of all different faith traditions cherish their faith in God, and to have ABC have a forum that spoke in such demeaning terms, I think it's evidence of how out of touch some in the mainstream media are with the faith and values of the American people.
He went on to say, he just said, you know, and when you're in public life, which y'all know this, y'all been working on this show for 20 years, people say things. They say things, they criticize constantly. He said you get used to that. But when someone's criticizing
your faith,
God and your faith, that is so important to the people that he represents, to most Americans, to most people around the world, no matter what your faith is, no matter what your belief is, then he has to stand up and he has to say something.
I think it's unbelievable that Oprah, that almost the next day, said, well, I was going to run for president, but I thought if God wanted me to, he would have said something. Really? So is Oprah Winfrey also mentally ill?
Joy Behar later said she was just kidding.
No, but she said, well, but I give money to the church, which is the most ridiculous comeback ever. Oh, so I wrote a check to the church so I can put down Mike Pence.
She's a comedian, not funny. All right. Great interview. The complete interview in about 15 minutes.
That's right.
All right. Meanwhile, coming up on this Monday, and there's Ainsley with the vice president down along the wall. Coming up straight ahead, 13 new indictments. We were just talking about that. Millions of taxpayer dollars spent, but no collusion found. So where does the Mueller probe go from here? Law professor Jonathan Turley joins us live next to discuss.
Plus, move over, Roseanne. This could be the worst national anthem performance of all time. Fergie.
We have been telling you about Batman Robert Mueller's indictments against 13 Russian nationals and 3 corporations for meddling in our 2016 election. And our next guest points out, despite no collusion found, the investigation will continue. So which way? Here to weigh in, constitutional law professor at George Washington University, Jonathan Turley. Professor, good morning to you.
Thanks, Steve.
So what did we learn on Friday?
Well, the most interesting aspect came down to an adjective describing Trump officials as unwitting contacts. Both the indictment and Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein said that there was no evidence of knowing interaction between Trump officials and this rather large campaign operation or election operation by the Russians. That's pretty significant. It's been a year. There's been multiple plea agreements, multiple indictments, and there really has been no nexus drawn to the campaign.
So it does, you know, a lot of people said this vindicates the president because there was no collusion. Do you feel that way?
Well, I think that it does support the president, certainly. It doesn't mean that they're not going to continue to investigate collusion, obstruction, other issues. But what it does suggest is at this point, there's no strong connection that has been found. That can only be viewed as supportive of the president's case. Now, can you put a lot on that? No, the investigation is going to continue. But I think that people are engaging in willful blindness to ignore that this is a fairly significant admission.
Well, I think, you know, politics is involved. It's the town you're in right now. Okay, so put collusion aside, and of course that's why they actually started the whole investigation. Then comes up the question of obstruction of justice. But have you seen anything to indicate that there's some there?
Well, he's clearly investigating obstruction. I think that I don't see a real case for obstruction, quite frankly. I never have. I think the greatest vulnerability may be in 2 other areas. One is financial fraud and crimes. Mueller really ramped up on a team of people whose specialty is financial fraud. With billions of dollars of investments, you can really have a motivated investigator who finds stuff. Paul Manafort's a good example of how that can work. All of his charges are unrelated to the campaign. The other big area is false statements. You see that with Michael Flynn. That's one of the reasons they don't want the president to sit down with the special counsel. Any inaccurate statements can lead to a criminal charge.
Right. And, of course, there are some stories out there. The LA Times has got that Rick Gates is going to flip on Manafort, although our Catherine Herridge says, as of now, no deal, and Gates is not cooperating, according to this. Ultimately, though, as we go forward, and I know everybody would like to see this in our rearview mirror, but your gut tells you what about what's going to happen next?
Well, I think that Mueller's mandate at least could be extended to cover Fergie. I mean, that I think, considering what you just played in terms of national security risks, that one I could support. But I think what's going to happen is that he's got a lot of lines already in the water to prosecute. When Gates was indicted, I wrote a column saying that it seemed to me that that indictment was written to force a plea agreement. I still think that there's a chance of that. But the big question is what has happened in terms of his investigation, financial dealings, and obstruction, and that'll be unfolded in the weeks ahead.
All right. Stay tuned. Jonathan Turley, thank you very much. All right. 6:20 now here in New York City. Coming up, Ainsley goes one-on-one with the vice president at our southern border. Her exclusive interviews coming up next.
Illegal crossings are down nearly 50%, but even against that backdrop, the American people deserve to know that we still apprehend 1,100 people attempting to come into this country every single day.
Good morning. Welcome back. We have some quick headlines for you. Funerals continuing for the 17 victims of last week's school shooting in Florida. Now there are calls for 15-year-old junior ROTC cadet Peter Wang to receive a military burial. He died while holding doors open for others to escape. A petition posted on the White House website saying, quote, his selfless and heroic actions have led to the survival of dozens in the area. Wang died a hero and deserves to be treated as such and deserves a full honors military burial. And an incredible picture here. This is Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel visiting 15-year-old Anthony Borges in the hospital. Borges was shot 5 times while protecting fellow students from gunfire. My Fox and Friends First co-host Rob Schmidt is live in Parkland, Florida this morning. We will check in with him a little bit later in this hour, so stay tuned for that. He has new information on the shooter's past. A brand new report reveals intelligence and strategic failures may have led to that deadly ambush attack on 4 American soldiers in Niger. The New York Times reporting the men were left in terrorist territory longer than planned with no backup. They were prepared for a routine patrol but ended up being sent to search a terrorist camp. The Pentagon's official report on what happened is still under review. Let's look at your headlines, guys. I'll send it back to you.
Good to get the bottom.
Thanks, Jillian.
Yeah, thank you, Jillian.
Well, with the U.S. Senate rejecting another immigration bill, DACA and our border security are back on the minds of both Americans and the Trump administration.
That's why Vice President Michael Pence took a tour of the Rio Grande Valley sector of the border on Friday with DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen and Texas Senator Ted Cruz.
And afterwards, he sat down with me for an exclusive interview. Take a look.
Mr. Vice President, thank you so much for being here. Why was this important to you to come down here to the border?
Well, as you know, President Trump has made a priority border security, building a wall, beginning the process of reforming our immigration system. But being here on the border, seeing the work that our Border Patrol does every day, it just underscores the need for the Congress to come together and provide the funding for a border wall system that will enhance the security of our country, prevent the flow not only of illegal immigrants, but also individuals who represent a danger to our communities and the flow of illicit drugs. It's time for Congress to act, and I feel more convinced about that having been here today, having received the briefings that we've received.
What was your reaction when the Senate did not pass the immigration bill?
Well, I think it was a great disappointment to millions of Americans who see the 4 pillars of President Trump's proposal, but also it's a deal that permanently solves the issue of DACA. You have 1.8 million people that were brought into this country as minors are here through no fault of their own, and President Trump, with the compassion of the American people, has said we're willing that we should solve that.
What happens now to these DACA recipients?
Well, they remain in limbo. The president took a stand for the Constitution and the rule of law, but he set a timetable to March the 5th to say now Congress has to come together and work in such a way to not only solve the DACA problem, but also to keep the promises that he made to the American people.
You're here with Secretary Nielsen and with Senator Ted Cruz. What did you learn today that you didn't know before that will help you, that you'll take back to Washington?
Well, I've learned that we've made great progress in securing our border since President Trump took office. Illegal crossings are down nearly 50%. But even against that backdrop, the American people deserve to know that we still apprehend 1,100 people attempting to come into this country every single day. And in this district alone, 85 individuals have been incarcerated for their association with MS-13. And so we have real challenges.
So, Mr. Vice President, we are on the Mexico side of the wall. So if anyone swims through the Rio Grande and they come here, this is what they face. We don't have a wall all the way across the border, but you would like that to happen, correct?
President Trump made a commitment to the American people that we're going to build a wall. That means we're going to have a physical barrier on our southern border.
When we were doing the boat tour earlier through the Rio Grande, we saw the Mexican police on the other side. Many of them were standing up on the cliffs. We were also told when we drove by one area that was Rock Alley because the Mexicans will put rocks in slingshots and fire them over onto our border agents and sometimes hit them. What made you want to go and do that today?
Well, I think for me it's always about seeing and understanding, and to be out on the Rio Grande and to see a river that at some points is less than 150 yards wide, a river where literally every day people are entering the water and swimming across, sometimes with rapid currents, risking themselves and risking minor children to come into this country illegally. These Border Patrol agents take great risk every day, and unfortunately, in 2017, we saw a 73% increase in assaults against Border Patrol personnel.
I know if we build the wall, there are a lot of companies that they want those contracts. It'll bring jobs to America as well. The prototypes are all ready. There's several prototypes. The wall behind us, you can see through it. Do you prefer that, or what type of a wall would you like to see built?
Well, President Trump will make the final decision about the structure of the wall, but the first step is that Congress has to fund it. You know, we were disappointed this week, but look, we're going to stay on it. And the president's absolutely committed, our whole administration is, to work with Republicans in the House and the Senate, to work with Democrats in the House and the Senate, and find a way to build this wall and to solve the DACA problem and reform our immigration system. It's absolutely imperative we do it, and once that funding is provided, we'll make the decisions, and I guarantee you this builder turned president will get that wall built faster than you could possibly imagine.
Very thorough. You spoke to some of the Border Patrol agents down along the border. Mm-hmm. Are they happy that this administration has taken a different tack than the last one?
Absolutely. So the vice president went down there. You were down there. They all said they met you a few weeks ago, and they gave me a hat, the Border Patrol hat, and they're very supportive of this president and this administration. Many of them told me they're kind of torn because a lot of them come from Mexican families where their parents immigrated here, and so their families are not necessarily supportive of the jobs that they're doing. I talked to one agent who wrote a book, and he said, I'd love to come on Fox and Friends and share my story. I fought for my country for 10 years, then I became a Border Patrol agent, and I don't have the support of my family because they're saying that I'm arresting my own people. Yeah. But he said the law is the law, and I want to follow the law, and the paycheck's nice, and he supports this administration. The vice president went there and had a roundtable discussion with the Secretary of Homeland Security, and you saw Senator Ted Cruz there. They had a roundtable with all of the big head honchos down there to find out what their needs are. MS-13 was discussed, the opioid problem, illegal drugs, and I think that the vice president was listening to all of them, and we'll take that back to Washington.
All right, and Border Patrol will be part of it if they get more money. Meanwhile, we'll talk about more of that later, Ainsley. And Dan Bongino is discussing about all this, and he wants to talk about it and guns when we come back.
She invited all the kids to come up on stage. I was like, I love her. Because all the kids came up and they were singing. So I really like her. I don't really like it when people take creative license with a song that's so traditional like that.
You don't have to spice up the national anthem.
You know when someone sings, they go, yeah, 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 and they do that addition to all the songs? Yeah, I don't like any of that.
Dan Bongino is a former New York City cop, a former Secret Service agent. He's a
great singing voice, by the way.
The NRA TV as well. And he's got a great voice in the shower, as we all do, I would imagine. But still, what'd you think of that?
You know, what was absolutely priceless, I was watching on the feedback loop here, was the reaction of the players who were like, what is this? Is this the national anthem of this country or
She's
another
been through
country?
a lot, Dan. She and her husband just broke up, and she looks great.
Right.
She got us all talking about
listen,
her.
I like
the
her
singing
haircut.
is great. It's just what song is she actually singing? That's the question.
Dan, my whole thing is, I was just so glad when I heard controversy for the national anthem. I thought, oh my goodness, did these all-stars take a knee? I'm so glad we just could talk about the music element of it. But can we talk about what happened? Right.
Good point.
Friday in the afternoon, an extraordinary press conference took place, and a 36-page narrative was released that showed what the Russians did, and 13 Russians have been sanctioned, about the intricacy of their cyber attack on our election system. Everything from Bernie Sanders to Marco Rubio to Ted Cruz, and especially President Trump, bolstered by this Russian operation. How effective? I don't know. But in the big picture, I listened to Jonathan Turley with Steve a moment ago, and I'm thinking to myself, the hit on Trump is coming, and they're going to go after his businesses. Do you feel the same way?
You know, Brian, if I was Donald Trump right now, I would be pretty ticked off. First, he's spied on by the Obama administration in what was the most elaborate espionage scheme against a political candidate using police-state tactics that I've ever seen. Secondly, he's subject to a government witch hunt for a collusion fairy tale that nobody can seem to prove. Now, this is what, as a former federal agent, let me tell you this, and let me warn the entire audience here. Here's the frightening thing about government witch hunts. They always find a witch. They are going to find something if this continues, Brian, and this should really disturb everyone. And where are the liberals on this, by the way, all the civil liberties advocates? They seem to have embraced the police state fully at this point.
Listen to this. We've got a soundbite for you. It's Jerry Nadler. He's a congressman, a Democrat from New York State. He actually compared the Russian meddling to Pearl Harbor. Watch.
This is a very serious attack against the United States by a hostile foreign power, an attack against our election process, our entire governing process. We know that the attack is continuing. The president and the Republicans in the House, for that matter, refuse to do anything about protecting us from an attack. Imagine if FDR had denied that the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor and didn't react. That's the equivalent.
Is that the equivalent?
I mean, do you believe is this for? I mean, that's a real clip, right? You guys didn't like snip
this
up.
No,
I mean,
and he's a real congressman.
Jerry Nadler, do me never ever do us all a favor. Never ever do national cable media again. That was the most horrifying cut I've heard, I think, in this entire case. Let me get this straight. Pearl Harbor, where men were literally cooked in the water because of the oil that had leaked from the ships. They drowned to death in compartmentalized little ships and portions of the ship where they drowned. And you're comparing that to Facebook ad purchases by the Russians? Are you serious? What planet does this guy live on?
Dan, he's also he's saying the president and the Republicans are to blame, but keep in mind when all this was happening, it was the former administration, and I don't even know if it's fair to blame any of them. I mean, these were the Russians that pretended to be Americans that were over here meddling with the election.
They deserve to be punished.
Ainsley, I was on Fox and Friends this weekend, and I pointed this out, and I want everybody to pay attention to this. Barack Obama's last press conference in December of 2016, everybody go back and look at it. They even played the video. What does Barack Obama himself say about this Russian scheme? And by the way, the Russians are not innocent players in this. They are clearly attacking our democracy. But what does Barack Obama say about it? He says, hey, it's not like it's some kind of sophisticated scheme here. And he minimizes it and downplays it. So let me ask you this. Who's right? Jerry Nadler, where it's Pearl Harbor, and what do we do next? We nuke the Russians? Or is Barack Obama right? I'm dead serious. Who's right here? Is Barack Obama lying or Jerry Nadler?
I think Russia has to start fearing us again, and we got to do something with their elections, personally. Dan, real quick, on guns, we know you do some TV work for the NRA. Where do you stand? Are you open to listening to how to make this situation better, or you just say there's two separate issues here when he looks at Parkland?
No. Of course, Brian, we all have to be. I mean, I have kids, too. I was a Secret Service agent. I spent my entire life trying to make the country and the president more secure. I'm not patting myself on the back. You all paid for it as taxpayers. But we have to do things that actually work. And the problem is, if you're going to open the conversation on the other side of the issue, that is, by calling people accomplices to murder and insulting everyone who doesn't agree with, your program, then nothing's going to happen. We have to start with an open, honest dialogue and stop the barb throwing.
Gotcha.
It looks like the conversation has started. All right, Dan Bongino, we thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dan.
Florida.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
42 minutes after the top of the hour, and coming up, families are still grieving after the Florida school shooting, but officials are now making plans for students to return to class. Where are they going to go? Rob Schmidt is live down in Florida now.